Hey, greetings and welcome to week 2. This is going to be lecture 6. This is your last lecture of the week. So there's a quote here that I want to start off with in this particular lecture. The edge of chaos is a condition and not a location. It's a permeable, intermediate state through which order and disorder flow, not a finite line of demarcation. Moving to the edge of chaos creates upheaval, but not dissolution. That's why it's the edge of chaos. And that's why it's so important. The edge is not the abyss. It's the sweet spot for productive change. That's powerful. It's called Surfing the Chaos. It's a book, business book that I read several years ago. But man, what a beautiful statement. And it's uncomfortable. And it's difficult. And churches don't like it. I get it. Who likes to be taken to the disruptive edge of chaos? That's why we're resisting it so much in this current cultural setting that we find ourselves in. But it's there. It's in that liminal space, in that ground between order and chaos, that newness emerges, that opportunity begins to emerge, that we can begin to imagine, right? Let's think about going all the way back to lecture 1, that way of reading Acts is missionally descriptive. We begin to imagine how the church discerned the work of the Spirit in these new and complex terrains. It's in that liminal space. We're no longer in control, where we can't manipulate, where we can't trust the institution to correct the wrongs of this world. That we're allowed to imagine the possibilities of what could be. There's this great diagram that I found on chaotic leadership, and I want you to look at it, because this, for me, points at the possibilities. That there is this abyss that means despair, and there's chaos that gives life to movements and activism. And then there's order that begins to emerge. And leadership is somewhere between the chaos and the order. Now, management is somewhere between order and control. And that's typically how we were trained to operate in the 20th century as pastors. We were managers. But I want to think about leadership. Going back to the quote that Todd Bolsinger gave. What leadership is about is somehow in the midst of the complexity, leading people into transformation so that we can collectively participate in a mission in complex environments. Order emerges in that middle ground, that space between order and chaos. Love that. And it invites us into something profound where we can reimagine our metrics for success. We can reimagine so much. And that's the last slide I want us to talk about. I want us to leverage chaos for the sake of adaptivity. Elements for us to think about as we move forward. And I'm going to walk through these quickly because we'll build on these as we go. It's in that middle space between order and chaos that we begin to pay attention to new wineskins. What's the newness that God is bringing into this world through this? What are we not attentive to because we are so constrained by the nostalgia of the past or the prescriptions of our methodologies that we're missing the discernment of what God is up to now in the new wineskins? There's a sensitivity to the Spirit that begins, and I love Lance Ford develops this language called pneumatocracy, which means that we're under the leadership of the Spirit. And he says these words, having its roots in the word pneuma, spirit, the idea of the Spirit-driven leadership certainly is what we should all be searching for. In terms of the governance or the leadership, the idea of pneumatocracy speaks of a collective voice derived from apostles, prophets, teachers, evangelists, and pastors who are recognized by the faith community, that there's a leadership that begins to emerge as we collectively come under the leadership of the Spirit of God at work in this new and complex world that we live in. We need to learn how to survey the landscape. We need to think in terms of ecosystems. So it's not just getting a person saved, it's understanding the ecosystem in which they exist, the environment, the conditions, the world around them. What is impacting and shaping the lives of the people that we're seeking to reach? Living System invites us to think in ecosystems. I'd be arrogant and presumptive to march into the south side of Chicago as a white man and try to get everybody saved without understanding the conditions and the environments and the prejudices and the bias and all that contributes to the complex terrain of what it means to to live out the faith in organic contextual means. Where we need to start thinking in terms of experimentation versus guaranteed success. We want a surefire methodology in the churches. We want to grow our churches, right? What if we started thinking about experimentation? We're going to try this. We're going to see how it goes. We're going to see what the Spirit is into as we get involved in this. We need to think about chaotic leadership, which still believes in structures and systems. The problem with postmodernity and its distrust of institution, sometimes it just ends up being sloppy, messy. There are still structures and systems. It's just that the movement doesn't serve the structures and systems. The structures and systems that we utilize serve as the lubricant through which the movement can slide more easily. So those systems and structures need to serve the institution rather than otherwise. They need to serve the movement rather than the other way. We need to rethink hiring. Are we just hiring a bunch of specialists? Are we hiring people that can equip people to do the work out in the world? We're going to come back to that later. Restructuring budgets to reflect our mission. And then we have to understand the relationship of the stakeholders in the people that we're participating with in terms of change. How are they held together? What is the complexity of the relationship? How are they being impacted and affected by the changes that are occurring all around them? Do we ever sit back and do a relational map of how our changes and the way in which we lead are going to impact and flow out into other areas and groups of people? These are just some elements that I want us to think about as we move forward throughout the rest of this class. So we set the landscape. We've talked about the cosmological structures that shape our perception of reality and how we do ministry. We've gone from pre-modernity to modernity to chaos and complexity. We've kind of laid out the possibilities of imagining living systems theory. All of this is heavy stuff, and I know this is a very practical class, but I wanted to give you some background here so that we have a vocabulary and a language that we can talk about as we move forward. Thanks for paying attention to this lecture set. I know this has been a lot, but hopefully it's given you at least a little bit of an understanding of why modernity felt different from pre-modernity and why post-modernity feels different from where we've come from, and why the church isn't operating the way it used to. Because the cosmological structure, our assumptions about the way the world works, have changed. And we ought to be nimble and resilient enough, knowing that the church is robust. But as churches, we need to be nimble and resilient enough to be able to navigate the complex terrain.